Hello, everyone. Happy Friday, happy Friday, happy Friday. Hopefully, everybody's doing well today, getting ready for the weekend. Maybe your weekend's already started. I know we got some people from other parts of the world here, so it's always great to see all the different participations from everybody out there. Everybody, just give me a quick, type in the chat window. Let me know where you're from. Where are you dialing in from today? I've got myself. I'm in San Francisco, California. We've got Ben. Ben, you're right outside of Dallas, right?
Houston, right outside of Houston
Houston,
in
right outside of
spring.
Houston.
Yep.
Yeah. So we got Texas here as well. We got Atlanta, Georgia, Belgium. Awesome. Always great to see Antwerp. The UK, we got Kentucky. All right, Kentucky. I am originally we got another California, Oakland. I'm just across the bay from you, Dan. I'm over here in San Rafael. Great to see you. And Kentucky, it's great. I am originally from Indiana. Got Argentina on the phone too. Awesome. North Carolina. Brussels. Awesome. Great to see everybody. Fantastic. Um, all right. So this is our third session for Compliance Meets AI. And today the focus is going to be on data loss prevention. We are being recorded. So just heads up for that for everybody. If you don't want to be recorded, please drop off the call. And let's take a look at what we're going to cover today. And thanks, Ben. So quick, we got 5 minutes here for introductions, just some rules of the road. I'll talk about the webinar, how it's set up. I'm going to post a few links. If you've missed the recordings on the past sessions, I'll post those in here as well. And we're going to be talking about data loss prevention for M365, integration with sensitivity labels. We're going to touch a little bit on endpoint DLP as well. So we got a really exciting session coming up. We're going to leave some time for Q&A at the end as well. Thank you, Ben. So a couple things. Microphones are disabled at this point. I will enable them at the end of the call. But please post your questions in chat. You can use the Q&A. Either one are working. We've got people monitoring there. So we'll answer your questions as we go as well. We got Mexico. We got Netherlands. We got Canada too. All right. Great to see everybody on here. So put the questions in chat, put them in Q&A. We got a Vietnam as well. Awesome. Great, great, great. Netherlands, Mexico again. Awesome. So these are being recorded, just a heads up. You will get a link to the recording probably a day or so after this. I had a little snafu on the very first one, but I kind of resent everything out there, so we got that taken care of. So if you don't have the recordings, don't worry. I'm going to post them in chat here as we go during the session. And you're going to have a small survey. There'll be a small survey at the end too. So the team. So myself, I'm Jay Cotton. Nice to meet you all. See you all again if you haven't seen me yet. We've got Ben. Ben, you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Hello, everybody. Ben Perkins out of Spring, Texas, which is just north of Houston. Been a Purview SME for about 4 or 5 years here of my 6 at Microsoft. So it's specific to that, focusing mostly on information protection and risk. Excuse me. So happy to do this presentation. Hopefully I can teach you a few things along the way.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. We also have Kevin Wee on the phone as well. He's going to be helping me answer questions today. He's also going to be doing a session for insider risk coming up as well. Just take a look at what we got coming up on here as well, our next sessions. Today is DLP, but we also have on the mix next week is going to be, Ben, can you give me a slide, please?
All right. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries. Next week, we're going to be talking about retention. A really overlooked topic when it comes to Copilot. Retention, I'm sure we're most familiar with emails and all the rest, how we use those. But we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the unified audit log, how we can use that to investigate Copilot. And we're also going to have a good session on e-discovery. So lots of exciting topics tomorrow as well. October 31st, Halloween. So happy Halloween, almost everybody. I might dress up. We'll see. I haven't decided yet what I want to be, but I do like to dress up. But we got communication compliance for Copilot. Great way to monitor Copilot interactions that are out there. And they're going to wrap up this series on the 7th of November. And that's going to be insider risk. That's going to be my good friend Kevin Wee is going to be doing that session. So a lot of great sessions coming up. If you haven't registered yet for everything, please do. I'm going to post the links in here in a second. And just a reminder, we have Coffee and Copilot going on in there. Coffee and Copilot is really designed for Copilot Chat. So Copilot Chat is I would say, non-paid version of Copilot that you have. Everybody who has Office 365 licenses has access to Copilot Chat. And my friends are doing great sessions on that one for me. I will send that link. No worries, my friend. We have some great sessions going on. It's mostly healthcare focused, but everybody's welcome. Just be aware that the demonstrations and the things you see are going to be focused on healthcare specific topics. But please, please join. Everybody is welcome. They love to see the attendance out there, and it's really great sessions. My friends all host them, and you'll even see me doing some questions as we go along as well. And I'll post all these links here in just a second once Ben kicks off. Um, and one other thing to notice. So everything that Ben and I are going to talk about and Kevin during these sessions, there are Microsoft resources for this. We have what's called onboarding accelerators. We have solution optimization. We can do assessments on Purview. We have security optimization assessments. We even have AI governance workshops as well for AI agents as well. So all of these different topics we actually have these onboarding accelerators and assessments to help you get going so we understand what your actual lay of the land is when it comes to your Purview setup, and then also to help you get things set up and kickstarted and running. So all these are out there. Talk to your Microsoft account manager if you're interested, or if you don't know who that is, just drop me an email, j.cotton@microsoft.com. I'll help guide you, get you to the right spot for those. Last one is, we're going to kick off here. So that's great. I'm going to turn this over to Ben for our DLP sessions. I'm going to be posting links in here for the signups and then the recordings. And then I'll also be posting links as we go for the documentation that Ben's going to be talking about. So I'm going to turn this over to my good friend, Ben. Ben, you have the floor, my friend.
All right. Thank you, Jay. Always a pleasure to work with Jay, one of my early mentors here at Microsoft, very knowledgeable person. So hopefully one day I'll be as good at him as presenting. So with that said, we're going to talk about DLP, and I want to extend beyond how the labels integrate with DLP as far as Copilot for M365 goes, and I want to talk about some of the endpoint capabilities with generative AI, and I'm sure a lot of you might be happy to hear that we're going to kind of add a little lagniappe, as they say in Cajun, a little extra to the presentation so that we can ensure that you're getting all the information you need that's relevant to protecting data as far as Copilot for M365 and maybe the other capabilities that Purview can help you with when you're preventing that egress of data. So because of that, we're going to talk about licensing, right? And of course, E5 is the M365 E5 licensing is pretty much the easiest way to do it with a little bit of Copilot, of course, so that you can leverage that Copilot capability to recap meetings, to see if you need to follow up on some emails or chats. That's one thing I like to do is run it a couple times a week is are there any emails that I haven't responded to? Are there any chats that it looks like I needed to respond and didn't, things like that. But also a lot of folks like to use it to process information, to create presentations, to create reporting. And a lot of times that reporting involves the resourcing of data from maybe sensitive containers or maybe other sensitive items. And we want to make sure that we're protecting those accordingly. And DLP and sensitivity labels, or information protection as the solution's called within Purview, is a great way to do that. So we can help facilitate the protection of that data, but also encourage the use of Copilot to help with the efficiency and productivity within your day-to-day and take away some of the monotony of some of your tasking. So with that, as you see, there's some E5, there's some add-ons here, and depending on what the solution is. So, right, when you're talking Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive, that's going to be your basic level of data loss prevention. E5 will extend you into Teams and Endpoint. Of course, the easiest and best way to get that endpoint protection is to onboard your endpoints to Purview. And to onboard those endpoints to Purview, you're going to want to push out that MDE client. It's okay if you have another endpoint security. Obviously, we would love you to use ours, but you can put MDE in passive mode and it can still provide that endpoint DLP protection as data attempts to be egressed to printers or USB devices or browsers. Whatever the case may be, endpoint DLP will help you protect that. Then we have the cloud app capabilities as well with the Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, or often referred to as MDCA or MDA. You may see as the acronym for that. And then when you have Enterprise Box or Enterprise Dropbox and you have those set up within MDCA, then we can protect certain actions as far as the instances are concerned there with the data egress that meets conditions within that rule. So I'm going to go through the construction of a rule with you today. I'm going to go over sensitivity labels. I'm going to go over permissions, things like that, that will help you with your journey to protect data and understand the alerts you're seeing and be able to see that prompt and response and those kind of items that you may not know that there's, we use principle of least privilege and role-based access control. So sometimes there's a little nuance to it, and you want to be able to dive down into that prompt and that response, or maybe that document or that email, and see the actual data when you're doing your investigation or remediation of those incidents and alerts. So one thing you're not seeing here, of course, is the Copilot location, and we will go over that as we journey through the next 30 to 40 minutes. All right, I'm going to try to give you all thriller, no filler. So I don't have a lot of slide content outside of this licensing, because I'm going to take you into the tenant. We're going to look at some different areas of the tenant. And those of you, if you've ever received a presentation or a delivery from me, I'm not a slide reader. I like going to the tenant and show you where and how it's done, right? So, which I think a lot of folks appreciate. With that said, with labeling, right, in the information protection solution of Microsoft Purview, there's manual labeling, right? There's granular permissions we can put on labels. There's also auto labeling. There's two types. One is constructed within the label, and then we still have to manually publish that label for the client-side auto labeling, right, where I'm working in Outlook, or I'm working in Word, or I'm working in Excel, or putting a PowerPoint presentation together, and I put some sensitive information or other conditions that are met by that auto labeling rule, and then I can auto recommend or auto apply a label based on meeting those conditions right there in the client. Then there's another kind of auto labeling that's service side auto labeling. That's auto labeling within your containers, right? So I'm creating conditions. If you find this content and it's got this PHI in there, let's slap a confidential label on there. And maybe I already configure that label for protections, or maybe I'm going to use DLP to look for that label before it egresses, and then do some auditing or some action as far as that's concerned. So there's a lot of integration between the two, and understanding that, and then going over that with your organization and determining how you're going to create the label taxonomy, what you're going to do at the label item granular level, or what you're going to do at the DLP level, and then maybe even later on at the insider risk management level, which you'll learn more about that with Kevin in a couple weeks. So, but I do want to throw it out there. There's a lot of integration between the various solutions within Purview that gives you a nice capability to not only protect, but give you visibility over user activities, and even look for indicators of risk. So, again, that's going to be insider risk management, and that's going to be just another cool feature that expands your ability to monitor for and protect information that you may have otherwise not considered, right? So this is just some of the label information when it comes to Copilot, right? So Copilot uses sensitivity labels for added security. Label priority has a lot to do with how your labels are auto-deployed, right? So label priority is very important when you're creating the label taxonomy. You want to make sure your highest priority label is your most sensitive, because when you create your policies, you're going to say, hey, if there is a same or lower level priority on a label, let's go ahead and replace that, because we like these conditions better than someone who maybe manually put that label on there if it meets the conditions. There's also label inheritance, right? So if I'm prompting Copilot within Word or within PowerPoint or something like that, and I'm saying, hey, resource me all this information so I can create this report or this presentation, and it's grabbing some things from labeled items, then we have label inheritance. So if it grabs it from a confidential document, then now our new report or our new presentation would now be labeled confidential with that inheritance capability. It's also going to verify the user permission. So remember, don't be worried about Copilot exposing all of your data, right? Copilot in and of itself isn't going to create new vulnerabilities, right? Those vulnerabilities would have already existed, right? Copilot operates from the context of that user that's licensed for Copilot for M365. So for instance, if I have permission to see something, then so does my Copilot. So it really starts at the container level. And I know we already talked about I think SharePoint Advanced Management and oversharing and things like that, and getting your container level information under control so that users that shouldn't have access to things will be stopped at the container, and we don't have to worry about the granular approach as much, right? So of course, usage rights. The big one here is the extract, right? So view and extract. So if you're customizing your permissions on the label, or you're setting permissions to like view only, I don't believe view only has extract in it, right? So, and I'll show you that as we go through the label permissions and all that good stuff. But that extract component is important for the response portion for Copilot. So Copilot will go see it with your view permissions, right? It's saying, okay, he's got view permissions. Let me go look at that. But then if I don't have the extract capability, then I can't extract that data into the response, right? So the orchestrator is going to prevent the extract of that from graph through the LLM into your report, right? So if y'all understand that Copilot, there's three main pieces to Copilot, right? There's the orchestrator, the LLM, and graph where all the data is stored. All right, Copilot protection with sensitivity label inheritance. So this is just kind of more on the inheritance that we spoke to earlier. If I resource data from a file that has a sensitivity label applied, we're going to inherit that data into this new file that we've created with Copilot Assistance, right? There are some limitations currently that are being worked on. For example, it may be restricted if content grants view but not extract. So we covered that, right? Extract is important to extract the data out of graph or that source and into the Copilot response, right? Label inheritance dynamics. Remember, priority is important here, right? So your most sensitive labels should be the highest priority. And then, of course, your general labels, your public labels, what have you, depending on how you're using that taxonomy, those should probably be the lowest priority, right? So that those are getting replaced if sensitive information is found to be within a document and you have all that auto labeling and that good stuff turned on. If you're using DKE, unfortunately, we can't support that currently. So just be aware of that. And also the Teams meetings and chats. We're not currently recognizing sensitivity labels that protect the meetings and chats. Labels that protect meetings and chats are an additional feature anyway. The Teams Premium licensing, I believe, unless that changed, I don't. So I'm not a label expert. So unless that changed, my understanding is you need Teams Premium to be able to protect that Teams meeting with specific restrictions, such as like not allowing external users to participate in the meeting chat, right? That way sensitive data isn't egressing. But please realize for now, Copilot doesn't recognize those Teams meeting labels. All right, so before we go to Q&A, let's give me about 30 minutes to drive you through here, right? So first thing I want to do is call out, we are in the settings section of Purview. So Purview, most of your settings, whether it's holistic for Purview globally or whether it's a solution setting, which can be found here, 95% of them are here. There's a couple of questionable areas where settings are actually in the solution and maybe they should be here, but that's up to product group, not up to me. I just tell you what they've made and how to use it. I don't, so as far as that goes, you want to go down to roles and scopes and role groups. Now, of course, Entra ID, if you have access into Entra and you're able to go over there and do roles and permissions and PIM, you can do all that. But as far as role groups go, if you can't see these, you probably don't have the role management role within the role group for which you're using. So be aware of that. You'll need a role management capability, and then you can go in and add members, remove members from role groups. So get with your org management person or your global administrator and for that role management capability. Now, with that said, you're going to see both Defender and Purview roles in here because it's still back-ended by an SCC. But at the end of that, the Entra authentications and authorization is what's ultimately giving you the access and the perms once they're propagated out to the different solution areas within Purview. With that said, I won't cover communication compliance too much here, but I do want to point out some very important roles that may not be considered. So if you're wanting to see prompts and responses, data security AI content viewers is a very important role for that. It allows you to dive down into that activity explorer audited event, allows you to dive down into that incident and see the prompt and response within the content that was part of that incident, so that you can really get a good look at it and see, was this an actual data leak or was this just something else, right? Especially if you're using like a trainable classifier. Remember, those are for contextual relevance, right? Trainable classifiers, not as much for, accuracy as much as like a SIT or even an EDM would be, right? A DDM being exact data match. So with that said, this is an important role. as far as what we're going to be discussing today. Let's see, I think I passed the other one I was looking for. There it is. It's right above there. So Content Explorer, Content Viewer. So if I have a DLP alert or incident and I need to see that Word document, or I need to see that email that was allegedly involved in that incident and allegedly violated a policy, then I need that Content Viewer so I can dive down, actually see the contents of that Word document, the contents of that email, outside of already maybe being a compliance administrator or a compliance data administrator, right? So those are important ones too. So as you can see here, when you click on a role group, you can see the roles in the group, right? And so you can see DLP compliance management. That's a good role to have so that you can create DLP policies and set up the rules within those policies, right? So we definitely want to be part of that group if that's our intention there. Also, information protection admin is good for labeling capabilities. You'll also see a lot of view only in here and some other roles that aren't necessarily pertinent to today's activities, but you also see you get some communication compliance admin in here. So if I get added to communication compliance policy, then I can dive down and look at items that match. But I don't want to do any spoilers for our communication compliance session that's coming up either, right? So mostly information protection and DLP management are going to be very important for what we're discussing today. And then, of course, your content viewers, whether data security AI content viewer or content explorer content viewer, those are the big ones. And I'll let my colleagues and friends discuss the other roles that are pertinent to some of the the data risk or insider risk management policies like communication compliance and IRM. All right, with that said, you may come across adaptive scopes. I'm trying to think. I don't know so much. Maybe I know an IRM for sure, communication compliance, but essentially it's dynamic grouping for Purview. So if that hasn't been covered, it uses attributes and you can group folks to leverage. I know Jay will definitely speak to it when he talks about retention, because it's very important for retention policies when you're considering adaptive versus static and some of the limitations you run into there, right? So data connectors, we won't speak to that so much. For DLP and information protection. Device onboarding is important, especially for endpoint DLP, right? So when you're onboarding these devices, there's multiple ways you can do that. Like I said, MDE deployment in passive mode or active. We like active mode to have it do your antivirus and your EDR solution. But if you have something else you love right now, that's okay too, because you can deploy it in passive mode. It'll work well with the other solution in passive mode. But the important aspect of that is the Purview client for this purpose. So you can get that on the machine and protect egressive data on that endpoint, classified data on that endpoint outside of the purview, if you will, of your Office 365 solutions, like your OneDrive client sync, your data that's in your clients, your Office clients, things like that. Once it moves outside of that, what's looking at that? And the answer is the Purview client, right? So having that on the device. All right, and then there's also support from Mac, as you see on here. And then, of course, it gives you different methodologies of deployment. So you got local script, you got group policy, endpoint configuration, Intune, and, of course, VDI support. All right, OCR is also a DLP capability when you're looking at it here. OCR is included in communication compliance and advanced e-discovery. It is not included here. You can run an estimator and see what it would cost. It's about $1 per 1,000 scans, I believe. And you can scan it across various repositories. And if you find that maybe it's a little overwhelming as far as that scanning of plain text sit types within images, you can scope that down to known areas and places that you really know. I don't want data moving out of here, and maybe my container permissions are set up really well. So that's what OCR mostly affects within this particular section is DLP, right? So now we're going to move down to a couple other solution settings before we jump into either label or policy creation. And I apologize, I'm moving so quickly, but we're recording and it'll be transcribed and you'll be able to go and rewatch that. But I've got a limited amount of time to talk about a lot of exciting stuff, right? So let's get down into it. All right, DLP. So this is going to be the meat and potatoes of your DLP endpoint settings right here. And actually, I want to come back and talk to some of these later if I have time. But advanced classification, scanning, and protection is an important one here. So if you want anything outside of your regex-based sets, like your bundled entities, like your all full names, your credential types, a lot of those advanced type of classifiers, then you want to get this turned on so it can look at those items outside of OneDrive and SharePoint and Transit and email and all of that, so that you can identify that information that lives on those corporate owned endpoints, right? And make sure that you're getting visibility on all that data. Also, advanced label-based protection for all files on devices is another good item you can get turned on there to help you with that collaboration, that integration between labeling and DLP, right? File path exclusions for Mac and Windows, pretty self-explanatory. I will say, when you think of this endpoint section, think of it as specific to the conditions of your rules in DLP. So if we're blocking something here, it's for those conditions, right? This is not a network firewall, right? This is not an endpoint firewall. This is within the context of Purview and the endpoint DLP rules that I've created with certain conditions. So make that so make sure you understand that when you go in here and set things. Because, for example, when I set up browser and domain restrictions, which are very important, and I go and say unallowed browsers, does this mean nobody on the endpoint can use these browsers anymore? No, it just means when I set an endpoint DLP policy and I say look for social security numbers, look for MRN numbers that maybe I've created with a custom SIT, look for credit cards, whatever I'm looking for, make sure that no egress activity occurs within these browsers. And then the other browsers like Edge, of course, Chrome and Firefox, we can put a Purview extension on those and then make sure that we have that visibility and protection capability for egress of data that matches those conditions to those browsers. So you're going to see something in the policy, restricted domains and unallowed browsers. This is what it's referring to right here. And then restricted domains will be referring to right here. So when I set domains and I add one in here, it's allowing that domain. So I can egress data to that domain, and all others are blocked when it comes to the conditions of data that are in my endpoint DLP rules, right? So allow just this website, and then I still have restriction capabilities around that, but this is my global default, right? As far as what I'm allowing to go into those domains when I call out certain sensitive information types or trainable classifiers, the conditions within that rule, right? And you can use the service domain groups, and you'll see we conveniently maintain a list of generative AI websites for you, which is what today's conversation is all about. There's some other settings you can check out as well, but again, I don't have the time to go through it right now, but I did want to make the call out as far as that's concerned because of the generative AI portion and, of course, the advanced classification area. Let me see, is there anything else? Oh, analytics, super important. Make sure you have your analytics turned on. That's going to look at, what kind of sensitive information that is available under your classifiers may be transiting your environment. Just-in-time protection. Remember, it's an asynchronous classification, right? So if I have just in time, let's say I have data stored on a home drive, and then I'm moving that data from the home drive to an egress point, that just in time allows for the classification to occur in transit, right? So that way I can have that just in time protection if that document hadn't been classified or stamped yet, right? Or it hadn't hit the endpoint and been classified, or it wasn't classified in that repo. Diagnostics is great for endpoint DLP. Aggregate DLP alerts is a cool new solution. This is going to be more used for network DLP because that's coming along. Power Automate is an outcome of an action. So I'm going to move on from this section and then co-authoring. So we're not too worried about these information protection settings for today's lesson. So first thing I want to do is jump into the information protection as I hop into solutions here. And I'm going to go to sensitivity labels, and I'm going to just create a label, right? And then I just want to and I'm going to throw some stuff in here. I usually just do ASDF and whatever, but since I'm being recorded and it's a demo, I'm going to put demo in here, So, demo label that I won't publish. How about that? Okay, so anyway, what we're doing with this label, and this is to show you the permission, so I can show you that extract feature here. Now you can choose whatever color you like. Now, obviously, like these warning colors would be great for sensitive information. Maybe blue's good for internal, and I'm making callbacks, I think, to my military days and kind of the different colors and classifications that they used back in that time period, way back when I was in the Navy. So All right, so scoping the files. Now remember, teams aren't supported for Copilot, so I won't speak to that too much. Groups and site labels are more for controlling access to that group and site and controlling sharing of data from that group and site. So we won't discuss that so much, but I will talk to files and emails. So we're going to move on from there, and we're going to control access. Now we have content, watermarking, footers, and headers. You can do that too. That's great, right? Assign permissions here, and I can choose permissions, and I can do multiple permissions per label, so different levels of permission, basically by calling out groups. Of course, authenticated users is going to be your most open. If I provide authenticated users with certain levels of permission, then anyone that can authenticate as a user can see that item that I've labeled. Then we can be a little more restrictive and do users and groups in the organization, specific users or groups in the organization, or specific email addresses, maybe partner domains, vendor domains, right, that you may work with on a day-to-day basis, and you handle sensitive information with them. So you want them to also be able to at least view those items or those documents. Now, when you choose the permissions in here, this editor permission has copy and extract, but that's a little gray. So I'm going to go to custom, and then you see here, copy and extract. So that extract portion is very important to be able to extract that information, that way the orchestrator can tell the LLM, okay, go ahead and grab it. My user has permission to look at this. Go ahead and grab it and put it in your response. And that's that extract piece. So if I'm labeled and this permission on the label allows for extract, I can do it. Now we can prevent certain people from processing that data with Copilot, even though maybe they want to see it, right? Maybe we need them to see it. So we can provide them viewer. So you can go look at the document, but we're not going to allow your Copilot to process that into a report or a presentation, or whatever, if you're just going in Copilot and asking questions, right? So that extract portion is the extremely important part of that, right? I did want to talk about auto labeling because that's an important part of the processing component. It doesn't like me because I'm not putting stuff in there, so I'm going to uncheck that. All right, and you can do that just for classification purposes. So auto labeling based off of conditions, this is client side when I do it inside the label, but I'm not finished. Once I finish the label, I still have to publish that label for it to start auto labeling within the client, right? So with that, we want to make sure that we select our sensitive information types or our trainable classifiers that we're going to use for auto labeling processes and get that auto labeled. That way, if we're going to create a DLP policy to prevent the processing of data that has a specific label, then we can successfully do that and easily get those labels out there in an automated manner. Now, remember, that's an E5 feature. So for my E3 users, I apologize. However, you can require a label on everything, right? And as time goes on and users access data, they're going to have to label it with that label publishing policy. So that's kind of what I wanted to cover as far as that's concerned. So I'll cancel out of there. So that's sensitivity labels. As far as label policies, this publishing policy will manually publish labels, and it'll also get that client-side auto labeling out there. The auto labeling policy here is to publish a singular label based on the type of content that's in that item, right? And maybe I want to publish based on HIPAA regulations. And I know some of you are friends from across the pond or different areas of the world, and some of these regulations may not apply to you, and you'll have your own templates and your own sensitive information you need to adhere to. But for now, I am US based, so I'm not agnostic to it as much because I do mostly US based healthcare data protection and risk, right? So with that, I'm going to use this just to move us along, this HIPAA template here. And then with that, I said next. Thank you. So sometimes, you got to hit some stuff and it doesn't listen to you. All right. So next up, you're going to choose one label, right? Because you're going to apply one label based on the conditions that you select here. So I'm just going to say, let's choose the highly confidential all employees label. I'm going to slap that in there. And I'm not going to worry about admin units, but these are great. If you have a multi-geo reason, or maybe you have different regulations in different areas, you may use admin units to divvy up duties of different data protection admins so that they can handle the policies for their organization within the same tenant, or their region within the same tenant, or one of those items. That's ideally how I look at admin units. I don't have a customer personally that's used any of them yet out of, 80 some odd customers I've spoke to. So, but that's okay. That's okay, because you can use them if you need to, those administrative units, to divvy those up. Now, where do you want to apply the label? So labels are applied to Exchange in transit, and they're applied to SharePoint and OneDrive at rest as items are accessed, modified, so on and so forth. We can auto apply those labels. And of course, the crawler goes through and and classifies those and applies those labels as well once we create these rules. We also have on-demand classification, you may have heard of. It's a new feature, and that's for older, kind of stale data, right? Or cold data, if you will, data that hasn't been touched in a while, nobody's accessed it, but we want to classify it. Or let's say you changed up a policy or you changed up patterns within a SIT and you want to go ahead and reclassify based on those patterns. Let's say you created a new exact data matching SIT type and you say, okay, I want to go ahead and find and classify everything with this exact data match SIT. So you would use on-demand classification for that, for example. So with that, I'm going to go to advanced rules. I never do anything out of the box. Everything needs some tuning and modification, right? So with that, I'm going to go in here and, I'm fine with the rule name. Now, remember, policies, I will say, within here are going to be different than DLP. I would never combine workloads in DLP, and I'll explain to you why in a little bit. Because here I can express out each rule and the conditions will vary. Well, in DLP, I can't do that. So if I bundle my locations, it limits the amount of conditions I have, especially if Exchange is included with SharePoint and OneDrive. Then I'm limited to the document predicate conditions in that area, but I'll point that out again. Here, that's okay. I can choose multiple workloads. I can go in, make sure my instance counts are good, my operators are good to go, my groupings are good to go, right? Because it's not just the data, it's when the data becomes personal, right? So that might make it personal. Maybe this makes it personal. Maybe someone's doing a prescription and it falls under one of these. And then, of course, I got my trainable classifiers for contextual relevance, right? I personally would not use a trainable classifier in and of itself to auto apply a restrictive label or to have a very restricted DLP policy, but I would definitely use it as a supporting classifier within one of those rules or policies. Okay. Then, of course, you always have your exceptions to the rules you can get set up. And then, of course, the conditions will vary here. So these are exchange transport rule type of conditions. Jay and I are both former exchange engineers, so we both understand the ETR component of this, right? So, and that's very much how auto labeling and Exchange DLP both work in transit. So you're going to see a lot of similarities between Exchange transport rules, auto labeling, and Exchange DLP as far as that's concerned. All right, so I'm going to save that. And then the only difference is SharePoint and OneDrive, they're going to have the same type of conditions because they're the same type of container. It's just OneDrive is a personal SharePoint site, right? But still, content is shared, file extension is, document name is. So if you need to do these outside of what sits you already have, that might be a good way to tune the solution, right? And reduce maybe some of the false positives because, hey, I'm seeing a bunch of small log files that for whatever reason are popping up and we don't want those getting labeled. And that's what the simulation capability is for, right? So with that said, let's move over to that. I'm going to leave the out of box for the OneDrive. And I see time check. Okay. And then I got to move through DLP pretty swiftly. So, all right, run policy in simulation mode. This is a brave little box to check right here. But I guess if this isn't your first rodeo and, hey, I've set up conditions before, I'm mirroring the conditions I set up for another policy, and I just maybe need to tweak it or massage it for another EDM that I've set up, then, hey, if you feel like you can turn it on automatically after 7 days, you go right ahead. But I call this the brave little box of automation, right? Automatically turning on this policy to go ahead and drop those labels officially on those items. All right. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and exit out of sensitivity labels and auto labeling. Again, I know this is a lot of information in a constrained amount of time, but I'm one of those type of people. I'll give you a lot of info in a limited amount of time. All right, now I'm going to move over to data loss prevention. Remember, I pointed you to the endpoint DLP settings for data loss prevention, especially the important ones when you're talking about generative AI and egress of data to a browser when you're in respects to generative AI. The first policy I'm going to show you, though, is going to be the Copilot policy, right? So I needed to go to data stored and connected sources. This is browser. This is new protection right here. There's a couple prerequisites. You need an initial access policy. You got to enable a thing over in the Defender portal under Cloud Apps. But this will let you get, as long as your user signed into Edge, the ability to block egress of data and prompts to like ChatGPT, Grok, no, not Grok, sorry, DeepSeek, ChatGPT, Copilot Web Chat, and there's one I'm missing, maybe Gemini. Gemini is, I think, the fourth one. So, but if you want to block Copilot prompts and responses, you're going to select that first one. You're going to select custom. You're not going to use a template here because we don't use sits with this yet, but it is in development. All right, let me do custom policy 2 because I think I have one named custom policy already. And then I'm going to skip over admin units. All right, so pro tip. For some reason, we default check these all out of the box. I would never create a policy with everything checked out of the box. Just not me. I wouldn't do it. But if I check this and uncheck it, it unchecks everything else and saves me, 6 clicks there. So if you're selecting a different workload. So just pro tip there, a little inside trick. With that, I'm going to create or customize advanced DLP rules. I'm going to create a rule. I'm going to name it Copilot no response rule. All right, and then with that, content contains a sensitivity label. So this is what's available right now. I can select a sensitivity label. I'm going to use the highly confidential label. So if we come across this highly confidential label in a Copilot prompt, I want you to restrict the processing of the content. Very simple rule. If you go into Copilot for M365, it comes across a highly confidential label. This better not come back in a response. Well, it won't, right? This is in GA now, so it should be working effectively and properly. Now, soon, it'll be more than labels. It'll be supportive. I think we're going public preview in December. Feel free to correct me on that, Jay or Kevin, if I'm conflating that with something else. Where you'll be able to add SITs, sensitive information types, to not be processed by Copilot. But I always warn end users, please, please, please consider the power of Copilot. And if your permissions are set up correctly in your containers, in your different environments there, the power of what Copilot can do for your physicians or for your research teams or whoever has access to this sensitive data, when they may need that to help with processing a report or processing research or something like that, you may be blocking the power of what Copilot can do for them there and how it can increase that efficiency or maybe surface something that they hadn't considered. So I definitely say block things from Copilot with extreme caution, because then you reduce the effectiveness of what Copilot can be used for. So, all right. And so that is a very simple rule, right? And then who do you want to know about it when it occurs, right? So if someone tries to prompt Copilot, Copilot reaches out and tries to grab a sensitivity label, we can do what? We can make sure that that item was in the proper location as well, right? So, and it was in the right container and that user should have had permission to it. So that's a way we can use those incident reports to discern that information. This also has a simulation policy mode that we can leverage as well, but I'm going to cancel out and we're going to do an endpoint DLP policy. All right. Endpoint DLP is also data stored in connected sources. With that, I'm going to go next on there, and we can choose a template here if we so choose. I want to show you another item as well because it's a behavior that I've seen. So I'm going to do a custom template first, and then I'm going to come back and do a pre-formatted template for you. All right, so this isn't really a template. It's just custom configuration. So that's how I messed myself up. See what I did there? All right, so with that said, let's pass up these admin units and let's look at locations. Again, I don't want to put all these locations in one policy, so I'm going to uncheck that, and I'm just going to choose devices, right? With that said, when I create with a custom policy, and I go in and create a rule, so endpoint rule, and of course you're going to want to put endpoint, what type of data you're protecting with the rule, so on and so forth. Give yourself some information. That way, when you're responding to that incident alert, you know the rule that it affected and why that rule's in place, right? That helps with your folks that are triaging these incidents and alerts to have better clarity. Okay, it hit this rule, so this is the reason we should be looking for the information, or this type of information we should be seeing if it actually violated policy, and of course what we should do about it. Now, as you see here, we can do the content contains and all that good stuff, but I wanted to show you there's not an exceptions area like there is if I select a template, right? So the exceptions are very much that. If I have an exception, if within a rule, it is absolutely an exception to the rule, and I will not alert on that or notify the user if that exception is there. However, if we do an and not condition, which we can do with a custom, that'll still match. I will still see that activity, but the action on the rule will not be enforced, okay? That is done intentfully. That's saying if I want to create a rule and I want visibility where things were maybe seen, but I don't want to block that from going out, then I can do with the and not function. Whereas if I want to do an exception, then I can use a template. I can add the exception, and it will be an exception to the rule, and then we won't see that activity if it didn't fall under the exact conditions of that rule. So I just wanted to kind of clarify the difference between those two capabilities and how you surface those, right? So one surfaced with a template and one surfaced in custom policy. So as I grab a template here, yes, I know it's going to change things up. That's what it's telling me. It's like, okay, now you're changing what you're doing, and now I'm going to have different options. All right, so again, now I don't have my Copilot cheat because I didn't have a template. But once sits come, I'll probably be able to use that Copilot again and select that to deselect the rest. All right, so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to modify my endpoint template. And I'm going to take a look at this, and then I'm going to show you that now we have that exception. So see, that wasn't there when I did the custom, but this is exceptions. I match these conditions, but don't tell me about it if these exceptions exist, right? So that's kind of the difference there. And you see the groupings here, very similar or the same as the ones earlier when we went through that. And then the actions here. So I'm going to go through actions for restrict access, or sorry, audit or restrict that on devices, right? So audit restrict activities on devices. So remember when I talked about service domains and unallowed browsers, right? So upload to a restricted cloud service domain or access from unallowed browsers. Well, we said that in the endpoint DLP settings, what those would be. So what are we doing there? Well, we're going to block it because it's restricted or unallowed. Now, obviously, we want to block. Now, there are scenarios where you can add those service domain groups like specific generative AI websites where maybe I want to block with override. Maybe we're using enterprise chat GPT. I don't know. I don't know that I would, but maybe there's some sensitive domains that if a doctor's not in a browser or something like that, and sorry, I'm being very healthcare specific. So let's say they're not using a certain browser, and I've been using Opera for 30 years, and that's the browser I like to use. Then we can make certain exceptions there for certain sensitive domains, and we could say, okay, we're going to allow that in that scenario. So block everything else, but for that group of domains, we're going to allow that. Obviously not generative AI. I don't think we would make that kind of exception. But we also have some other actions that would specifically supersede the overall action when we set the unallowed browser or the restricted domain. Okay. All right, and then also paste to supported browsers. So in my tenant, based on endpoint settings, the supported browsers would be Edge, of course, and then Chrome and Firefox. Chrome and Firefox, we want to get those extensions deployed out there so that when that user is signed in to their profile, then the endpoint Purview client will make sure that those endpoint restrictions are applied. So if we're supporting the browser, okay, cool. If we meet the conditions of this rule, and we are attempting to paste to supported browsers, then do we want to audit that information? Maybe we want to block with override, right? Or maybe with that, we want to add a sensitive service domain group. And maybe with that group, we're going to do, if that's blocked with override, maybe we're just auditing here. Or maybe we're all out allowing, right? What do we want to do as far as that specific group of domains are concerned? Again, generative AI is probably not something I would allow. I would probably block that specifically and then lean on block to override here, because remember, you can allow sensitive service domains, and if it meets these conditions, well, I've allowed that, right? So that's how that works. So think of endpoint DLP settings specific to endpoint DLP rules and those conditions you're looking for, right? And then this is just file activity, egress kind of items here and all that good stuff. So that's endpoint DLP. How am I doing on time? Do I have a couple more minutes and then we'll open it up for questions?
You're fine, Ben. No hurries.
Okay. All right. Good deal. All right, with that said, let's hop into one more aspect of DLP that we can leverage in the context of AI, and I'm going to create a in-browser network activity policy. Now, again, like I said, this is going to have some prerequisites that you need to get set up, but don't worry, it's going to tell you about these prerequisites, right? So let's go in here and bypass that admin units area. Now, here's your prerequisites. It's popping up here in a big yellow banner. Make sure you do these things so that we can protect egress of data to these areas, right? So very nice of them to do that. Also, check out your role group permissions. Definitely read the documentation about in-browser DLP protection and make sure you get all that configured correctly so that you can capture that data. Now, the caveat to this, even though it doesn't require onboarding of endpoints, it does require end-user sign-in to the browser, right? Because that's how Entra and then furthermore Purview know that, hey, this user can't paste this text into this chat GPT or Gemini or web chat or DeepSeek, right? So we want to make sure that that user is signed in and we can enforce that with conditional access policies and session policies and things like that within conditional access policies. So make sure you follow your prereqs and read your guidance there. And then you can do cool stuff like select these generative AI locations, create a DLP rule for it, and then go ahead and inline browser protection. And then we'll condition content contains or IRM level, right? So I need to point out IRM level here in a second, and then that'll kind of prelude you to Kevin's Insider Risk Management presentation. So with that, I'm going to add some sensitive information types, and let's just say all full names. And then, of course, we can group it out. So we can create another group. And let's say, let's look for ICD 9 and 10. Oops, check those. Let's look for maybe medical terminology. And I'm just going to go ahead and add all of it just because that's fun. I can adjust my confidence levels. Remember, confidence has to do with existing patterns that are defined for confidence levels within the set. Ideally, out of the box, we have that pattern. If it defaults to that, instance count is unique instances of that information. So, for example, if I put, a credit card in a document, it's the same credit card number, same CVN, all that same, still only one unique count, right? There's still only one instance because it's the same credit card number. I don't care if it's one for purposes of volume count, right? So be aware of that when you're looking at instance count and trying to consider that, because I've had customers try to test and they copied the same credit card number. They're like, it's not working. I'm telling it to look for 10 or more. And I said, well, it only sees one. So even though there's 10 there, it's the same one, right? So, and then we can add additional if you want to. You can create another group. You can add another condition. So IRM, insider risk level for adaptive protection. Kevin will point this out, but this will be very important for adaptive protection and what that risk level is and how we can apply DLP if there's, risky AI usage, for example, and put them in a more restrictive DLP rule so that we're blocking things until we figure out why they're such a risky user, right? Maybe we're blocking them, even blocking them accessing data because we can use adaptive protection within conditional access policies. So anyway, too many spoilers. I'll let Kevin handle those conversations in a couple of weeks, right? So that's what IRM is for, that IRM adaptive risk level. And then, of course, the actions, we can restrict browser and network activities. So what you're seeing here is just the text. There's additional prerequisites or features that will expand your capabilities here for file upload, file download, those things with that visibility on the endpoint, with that visibility within the browser through Defender for Cloud Apps and all that good stuff. But as you see here, I can prevent text uploads, or I can just get the information. Maybe initially we're kind of vetting things out. I've got a lot of organizations in that stage right now. I just need the visibility. I need to see what's going on. So they have policies like this in place where they're auditing this sensitive information that's potentially being used in generative AI like ChatGPT, Gemini, DeepSeek, or Copilot web chat. And then, of course, we can get incident reports on that for both rules and policies, depending on how much noise you like, or maybe who the policy matches are going to versus who the incident reports for the rule matches are going to. So that's pretty much it outside of a couple more things I wanted to point out. And I'm going to jump over into my other tenant here, which is a shared tenant we use for these kind of things, where we can show reporting. So when you're looking at Activity Explorer within like information protection or data loss prevention, this is all up sensitive activities that are audited within the unified audit log. We give you a 30-day window here, but you can definitely go further back, 180 days for E3 users, up to a year for E5 users. You can check out these audited activities, whether it was a Copilot interaction with some sensitive information stamped on it, if somebody deleted a file with sensitive information, if they renamed it, relabeled it, if it matched the DLP policy. all of that sensitive activity will be found in the Activity Explorer, right? And there may or may not be an alert for it depending on how the policies are configured. This is just the audited activity. So be aware of the difference between Activity Explorer and your alerting, right? And then additionally, I know Jay presented on DSPM for AI last week and probably went over the Activity Explorer, but just to point out again, this is activity that is specific to your AI interactions, right? It's focused and honed in on that audited activity. So with that said, I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Jay, because that'll be the end of my particular presentation, and we'll open it up for questions. There we go.
Awesome, Ben. Thank you. Great information there. Everybody give Ben a good clap there. Fantastic work. Thank you, Ben. Awesome stuff. We're going to open this up for questions you have out there. There was one question in the chat that I didn't see as it was coming up. What other options besides text? Why are the other options besides text upload, grayed out, in the browser location? Ben, could you go back to that screen? I missed that one.
Oh, he's talking about he or she. They're probably talking about when I created the inline browser policy and the text upload was not grayed out. Is that what they're referring to?
I believe so.
Yes, that's correct.
So there's some additional, like, we can't see that activity just in the browser alone. So like if a file was uploaded or something like that, so the Purview client and device onboarding would be needed to see that additional activity that extends beyond the inline browser.
Got you. Awesome. Other questions out there from everybody? Open floor now, so feel free to come on. Great point out there. We have a couple questions just around, some extended functionality with the MDCA integration. We can control the app level. So we'll see if we can fit that into another session coming up as well. Inline browser protection, also a great topic, Ahmed. We'll see if we can get that into. My plan is really, these first 6 sessions are covering a lot of it, and then I do plan on having additional sessions moving into the new year. So we can definitely add those in there, and we'll see if we can maybe throw in one more session. I can always adjust this and make another webinar if we want to talk about some other pieces there as well. Is there a way to use multiple content categories to help minimize the sensitive detection of some trainable classifiers? Tim, can you flesh that out a little bit more for me?
Right.
I'm just trying to understand the question.
Yeah. So what I've noticed when I've developed some trainable classifiers on on SITs, I've created like some MRNs, epic count numbers, and those types. When I've added some trainable classifiers, the one you shown on the screen here, they've been overly sensitive when users been kind of using data that's really not sensitive. So we've been trying to tweak those to make sure we can detect MRNs, empty count numbers, but also when they're using sensitive data. So I was trying to figure out a way to minimize the sensitive detection of those trainable classifiers.
Ben, you want to take that? I can speak to it too.
Trying to think of a way to ideate that into a policy. I don't know. I'd have to consider that one. Yeah, because trainable classifiers, like I said, that's really contextual relevance. And you really want to use something a little more accurate than that when you're applying that as a condition in a policy, like a SIT or like an EDM or maybe a document fingerprint plus SIT. Those kind of things. Those might be some of the ways that you could look at it. But Tim, definitely reach out. I don't know what organization you fall under, but there's probably a CSA line that could sit down and look at policy and look at the reporting and come up with ways to massage the conditions within policy so that we can effectively assist with that effort.
Yeah. And you can always create custom trainable classifiers too, Tim.
Yeah,
that's something that I do work in healthcare. And it sounds like you would do too. I heard the words MRN. So Ben and I and Kevin, we all work in healthcare. So feel free to reach out to us. We can definitely kind of help you flesh that out for us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions out there from the group? All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for showing up today. Fantastic. Time is one thing we can never get back. So we really appreciate you spending the last hour with us. Don't forget, we do have additional sessions coming up. Next week is going to be around retention. I saw some retention questions in here already. DLP, the audit log. I also just posted a link to the survey. So please take a few minutes to fill out that survey. It's very short. You can do it. I'm going to send it out again via email. And just for everybody's edification, I will be sending an email out today, the relevant links we talked about, a PDF version of this presentation. I probably won't get to the recording link yet because it does take a little time to process, but I will send links to the other recordings we have as well. And then everybody will get a link to this recording starting probably early next week. But I will have an email out to everybody today from the sessions. And again, thank you so much. Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much, Ben. Great work, great work. Fantastic presentation, my friend. It's a lot in there, we know. And again, always feel free to reach out. We're happy to help where we can. Our goal really as engineers for Microsoft, especially field engineers, they call us cloud solution architects these days, is really to help you make sure to get the most investment out of your investment with Microsoft. Of course, you can give me a call. We're friends, my friend. Yeah. We're friends from way back. So always, feel free. But thank you all again. Great week. Have a great session or have a great weekend. And we'll see you all next Friday. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great one.
Bye, y'all. Have a great weekend.